Podcast City Network.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome to episode 172 of the Nest Podcast. I am the People's Champ, Brandon Brewer, and the Zach Bill is joining me once again tonight. Zach, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
It's good, buddy. We've got a lot of stuff to get into this week, but one of the things that everybody has talked about is running backs this week, and we've talked extensively on this show about how paying a running back in the NFL is kind of like, to quote Forrest Gump, stupid is as stupid does, because everybody goes out, pays big money to these running backs, and then inevitably they get injured and it's not really worth the contract. Reference Christian McCaffrey, who's been injured the better part of the past 2 seasons after signing a monster payday. Alvin Kamara's missed his second game in a row with a banged up knee. Hopefully he gets back on the field before the end of the season. We've got Saquon Barkley that can't stay healthy. Zeke, he's been paid, but he's not really been worth the money that he got paid. So, we've talked ad nauseum about these guys not being worth it. But then every now and then a week will come along where running backs just absolutely steal the show. Of course, I'm talking about Jonathan Taylor from the Indianapolis Colts, who dropped 5 touchdowns on the Buffalo Bills, becoming only, I think, either the 16th or the 18th player in NFL history to score 5 touchdowns in a single game. And then right on his heels, literally, Austin Eckler dropping 4 touchdowns on Sunday Night Football against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that game actually ended with a kneel down, and it was 1st and goal when they took the kneel. So he could have punched in a 5th if they really would have wanted to push the issue. So Zach, what do you think? Are these hybrid type running backs? Are these the guys that are deserving of these paychecks? The guys that can go out and catch the ball? Because both of them had receiving touchdowns as well.
I think if you're going to end up paying a running back, that's the guy I would more comfortably pay. I understand where, the nose down, just dive right at him type running back comes into play. Derrick Henry is of that mindset, and I think Barkley is too. But I think the proof is in the pudding that those guys get banged up, and they can't be reliable for you for years and years and years. They have flashes, I think, where they're super talented and competitive and all that stuff, and they're useful. But I think ultimately, it seems that the longevity and just the overall, more bigger of a package you get with one of these guys who is a threat in the passing game is just miles and miles more worthwhile and worth that big contract over one of those guys that can really only run the ball.
Yeah, I agree. And, these hybrid backs are really starting to be weapons. I mean, look at Cordero Patterson for the Atlanta Falcons. This is a dude that's primarily in his career been used as a wide receiver or a punt returner. And here he is lining up in the running back position and having the best season of his entire career. I mean, I do think that this is something that all teams are going to adopt. We've talked about how the mobile quarterback has changed the game. Well, the dual threat running back has changed the game as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Just take Jonathan Taylor, for example. You're talking about a guy who's playing with Carson Wentz. We've all had our opinions about that guy, and I can only imagine what he would be able to do if he got to play with Andrew Luck before he got all banged up. I think it's a vital weapon to have, and I think Kamara is probably the top of that heap. And if more guys in the running back position can kind of emulate that and start being able to catch some passes, I think they'll see themselves with a lot more career length and a lot less injuries, and they can get that big paycheck and still be a contributor to the team.
Yeah, we got a comment from Jared Sneed saying, "Don't pay backs regardless of output." I can't name the last high dollar back that has won a Super Bowl. That's a good point. You do have to kind of go back in the annals of NFL history to kind of bring up some of these names like Terrell Davis, Jerome Bettis,
Mhm.
uh,
That might
Emmitt
be it.
Smith.
Yeah.
Those guys, were on Super Bowl winning teams, but there hasn't really been too many dominant running backs in the at least the last decade or so that has won. Usually it's the quarterbacks or the defenses and stuff like that are winning these Super Bowls.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It's kind of an odd thing to think about because you think if you have a stud running back, then you're set, and that opens up so much more for your offense. But if they take up a lot of cap space and they get injured, that's just holes in your offense that you can't fill.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, the way that things are going in the NFL and with the salary cap increasing, these running backs that do have these huge outputs are going to keep getting paid.
Oh yeah,
There's no way somebody like a Jonathan Taylor is going to get paid less than Zeke Elliott whenever he's out there performing so much better. It's just supply and demand, and it works its way into the NFL. It works its way into all sports.
Sure.
But let's talk about Week 11, what we saw on the field, and how great it was. It was a good week of football, in my opinion. And we talked a little bit about the Thursday night game between the Patriots and the Falcons on our Saturday night show, and we talked about that defensive domination that the Patriots displayed, but we didn't really know the ramifications of what that was going to mean until we saw the games happen on Sunday. Of course, after the Jonathan Taylor destruction of the Bills, suddenly that win on Thursday night catapulted the New England Patriots to first place in the AFC East. The Bills suddenly look like a team that's kind of lost out there. How do you explain that? Not only the Patriots, but the Colts, who started off like 1-4, 1-5 this year, suddenly one of the hottest teams in the NFL, and the Bills, a team that a lot of people, myself included, predicted to be in the Super Bowl this year, suddenly can't really play the game.
It's a great question. Honestly, I can only speculate on what is going on with the Bills. I don't think they have any significant injuries to talk about. You and I have talked a lot about their need of a solid running back. They might not need one of those studs like we talk about, but I do think they need somebody that can actually, carry the ball and take some pressure off of Josh Allen. But for that defense to give up all of those running yards and all that stuff to that Colts offense is just it's kind of a big anomaly. And I don't think very many people saw that coming. You and I on the Saturday show talked about, oh man, that's the Bills defense. That's not a great matchup for that Colts offense. I guess we were wrong, at least in the running back department, and a huge shocker there. I think if you weren't paying attention to the Patriots, you probably are shocked by the fact that they were able to creep up into first place. But like we've always been talking about, their defense keeps them in games, and I think they're just capitalizing on the Bills having a few down weeks.
Yeah, and it is interesting. They are 3-5, or I'm sorry, 3-2 over their last 5 games. They've got losses to the Tennessee Titans, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and now the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a team that, if I would have looked at this schedule at the beginning of the season, I would have penciled pretty much all of those in as W's.
Yeah.
So it's Josh Allen has not performed well. He was held to only 209 yards passing against the Indy defense. And like you mentioned, their rushing attack is just not there. Devin Singletary has not been good. Zach Moss has not been good. Matt Breida actually led the way for the Bills rushing attack with 51 yards this week. That ain't gonna fly.
No, and I don't think their wide receiver core is talented enough to just have a purely, air attack. Stephon Diggs is great in and of himself, but you double team him, then what happens? And I think maybe a few of the holes in that Bills defense are being shown. And I think teams that are smart-minded can capitalize on that. I mean, clearly no one saw the Jags winning against the Bills. And I don't think very many people saw the Colts winning against the Bills either. Yet here we are, and they don't have very many games left. And imagine how wild it would be if they give up the AFC East to the Patriots.
I mean, the way that it sits right now is the Patriots are on top of the AFC East, and I'm here for it because they still have 2 games to play against those Buffalo Bills, so that will really be the determining factor of who's going to walk away as the AFC East champion. But right now, it's insane. And another game that kind of shook up the AFC this weekend was the fact that the Houston Texans upset the Tennessee Titans.
Crazy.
Tennessee Titans are the 1 seed right now, even without Jared saying Miami. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen, bro. The Titans are the 1 seed, and even without Derrick Henry, they've managed to put games together and actually keep winning, sitting right now at 8-3 after this most recent loss. But going into a game against the Houston Texans with everybody before the season, we're like, oh, that's going to be the first 0-17 team. They come out there and they won.
Did you see my boy Tyrod Taylor out there?
Tyrod Taylor's out there dealing. I'm so happy for that guy. He's probably had the worst luck in NFL history, but finally he's been able to play for the better part of an entire season, and he's balling.
Yeah. I mean, he's balling on a Texans team. I mean, this is a team that got rid of D-Hop, that Deshaun Watson wants out of desperately. This franchise has just been abysmal and has wasted people's careers for years on end at this point. And this guy is finding success. He's one of those guys who's basically just been tossed around the league as a second string, and then some team will pick him up as their next, the starter, and something will happen and it'll get ruined or whatever. And of all the places for him to have success, I think the Texans was about the last place that people expected.
Yeah. They haven't won a lot. They're still sitting at 2-8 right now. So it's not that great, but yeah, they've won some pretty, the 2 games that they've won have been important games. And I got to give it to Tyrod for just going out there and balling for them. Yeah. But the Tennessee Titans lost this game. 100%. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Texans went out there and won it. The Titans lost. And yes, I know the loss of Derrick Henry is huge. And I said it a few weeks ago. I expect them to start to fall off. I don't think they'll remain the number 1 seed in the AFC for much longer. And much longer could be as soon as next week, because next week they have to go and play the New England Patriots defense. And that's a defense that's been absolutely humming. And if they can't move the ball against the Houston Texans, how can they expect to move the ball against a team that just shut out the Atlanta Falcons, and they haven't allowed a score in about 19 possessions?
Yeah, 100% on that. I mean, if Ryan Tannehill is going to throw 4 interceptions against the Texans, good luck to him against the Patriots. I mean, maybe they'll figure something out between then and now, but that was a terrible performance on his part. He's a guy who should have had a great game against that Texans defense, with or without Derrick Henry. He had plenty of weapons and opportunities to do well, and he just made mistakes. I mean, there's no excuse for a guy throwing 4 interceptions like that. That's just a terrible day. I don't know. It's kind of crazy because I definitely expected them to do okay. And I think them having to rely on their offense being a passing offense instead of, run first is really killed them. But I didn't think it would be this bad. This is one of those games where you expect them to squeeze out a win. Maybe they don't dominate them, but there should be no reason why they would lose. And in the fashion that they lost against a Texans team.
Yeah. Now, I'm not sounding all the alarms for Tennessee Titans fans out there. I still think that they can win the AFC South. I still think that they will be a playoff representative, but things aren't as bright and sunny as they once were. Yep. Coming up, they do have that game in New England against the Patriots. I do have that one scheduled as a loss. Then they have a get-right game at home against the Jacksonville Jags. They should be able to win that one. Then they have a game traveling to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh showed last night on Sunday Night Football that they are resilient and they're hard to put away. That could be a tough game. Then they play the 49ers. Then they play Jared's Dolphins. And then they finish the season off against the Texans. So redemption in that game, possibly. They will still end up, in my opinion, winning that division because it's such a I mean, I'm not going to say terrible because the Indianapolis Colts could sneak up and steal it, but I think that the Tennessee Titans, they've already played the Colts twice. They've already played the majority of their difficult games. The rest of the schedule is favorable. I only see maybe 2 games on there that are going to give them some trouble.
Yeah, I think that makes sense when you're playing one of those, mediocre / bad divisions. Even if you do something like this Titans team and just kind of fall apart, you still have the chance to come back because everyone else is falling apart in your division as well. I agree. I think the Colts are really the only team that has the chance to kind of come out of nowhere and win that division. But a lot of stuff is still going to have to go their way. I do think this Jonathan Taylor just was great for Sunday. Can he replicate? Probably not to that level, but if he can still stay active and be a part of that offense, they have a chance. But I don't like it as much as I like the Titans being able to figure it out and just make it happen and win enough to win that division, because you don't have to be a stud of a team to win that kind of division.
Yeah, I agree. Get sidetracked a little bit. We have a comment from Antonio that says, first off, thank you for the Kittle advice over Gallup. You're welcome. Now, does Gallup show value since he has the potential to be a number 1 wide receiver on Thanksgiving with Cooper and Lamb on concussion protocol? Absolutely. With both of those guys out, Gallup will get the bulk of the passing, but they're also going to probably use Zeke to run the ball a lot. If they're able to move the ball on the ground, expect a heavy dose of Zeke with Gallup being peppered in there. If they can't run the ball on Thanksgiving, then Gallup will definitely have solid upside.
Yeah, I think he's really, Dak's only choice at this point.
That's about it. Yeah.
But that's bad news because Dak was not successful against the Kansas City defense. And we'll get into that in our booms and busts, but I still have my reserves, even though Gallup is going to be basically their wide receiver 1. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if it's their O-line or what. And I also think it's probably due to the fact that they can't utilize Zeke for whatever reason. So he doesn't take any pressure off of the passing game, but it seems like things are kind of falling apart here in Dallas because Zeke and Dak had bad games, and against that defense that we've all been talking about is basically non-existent. They should have been able to do a little bit more, and that should have been a much higher scoring game, but that Cowboys offense just couldn't do it.
Yeah, they really couldn't. They could not get anything going. If you would have told me going into Sunday that the Cowboys defense was going to hold the Kansas City Chiefs to 19 points, I would have said, oh, well, the Cowboys win because that offense can score a lot of points.
Yeah.
However, they only scored 9 points on the strength of 3 field goals.
Yeah. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, obviously, but if you take the amount of money that Dak and Zeke are taking up, and it's just wild to think about how much they have taken from that team. Maybe deservedly so, more so on Dak's side. I think he deserved a good paycheck. But Zeke, where's his excuse? Like, he sat out and did all that stuff for his paycheck, and he's just been kind of sitting there. Now, I don't know if that's his fault or if that's Mike McCarthy's play calling or what, but one way or the other, these two guys are taking up X amount of cap space and have nothing to show for it. And this is a team that's always talking about this is their year and they want to win a Super Bowl and this, that, and the other. Well, how you're going about it does not seem to be working, because I completely agree with you. For their defense, which is not one of the best defenses in the league, to hold the Chiefs to that score, they should have been able to run 30, 40 points on them.
For sure. Jared's dropping some knowledge in here in the comments saying that Kansas City has given up or hasn't given up more than 12 points in the last 4 weeks. So their defense has actually started to step up and play. And the offense has started being able to move the ball. They kind of go hand in hand in Kansas City. If the offense can move the ball and stay on the field, the defense gets to leave the field. They get to rest. They don't get exploited all game long. So, whenever the defense was struggling, so was the offense. They were going 3 and out a lot. The defense was on the field pretty much the entire game. Those big boys get a little bit winded. They don't tend to play as well whenever they're out of breath. So there's a lot going on in Kansas City. It seems like they've got their swag back now.
Yeah, they definitely have come back to their almost former self. I think the defense is kind of on the right side of the injuries, because obviously you're at this point in the year, you're facing offenses that are banged up. Obviously Dak did not have all of his weapons there for that game against them. So that might be part of it, but I do think they have figured something out, and they aren't just the complete no-show defense that they used to be. And I think that goes hand in hand in what you were saying. The offense has to give them a breather, and they can't just be doing 3-and-outs and interceptions and stuff like that. So it all kind of works together.
Now, on the other side of the coin, the Dallas Cowboys, are they doing what the Cowboys typically do, and they build up all this hype and get all this fanfare and everybody talking about this is their year, just to let everybody down and be a huge disappointment? It seems to be what's going on, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think at the beginning of the year, in our text thread with our friend Adam, he kind of mentioned that, whenever the Raiders were like 4-0 or whatever, and the Cowboys were doing well, these teams fall off eventually. You can't ride that wave for that long, especially if you're not if you don't have a good foundation as a team, if you don't have a solid O-line, a relatively solid defense, if you completely rely on, 2-3 weapons on offense to do everything for you, I think you'll eventually either get figured out, someone will get hurt, it just will quit working, and stuff will start to fall apart. And that's 100% what you're seeing here in Dallas. You've got injuries, you've got just people not being able to carry their weight, and it's just compounded. And yet again, here we are, like we always talk about, the Cowboys are failing to meet all those expectations with all that hype and everything.
Yeah. Does Mike McCarthy get fired if they don't win the NFC this year?
If I'm Jerry Jones, I fire him. I guess it was a bit of an experiment to bring him in. I don't think very many people were fans of it, and it clearly hasn't worked. He hasn't been awful, but I don't think the expectation is to be mediocre there in Dallas. Obviously, I think they desperately want a Super Bowl, and he's not going to help them make the Super Bowl at all.
Yeah, I agree. Now, Zach, I know you went with Ryan Tannehill as your starter for fantasy, and that was, going into the weekend, we thought that it was a good decision. After, hindsight's always 2020.
Yep.
We also talked about Cam Newton as a potential good starter, decent starter, if you didn't really have any other options. You had him on your bench and opted to start Ryan Tannehill instead. Let us know how that went.
Not great. And yeah, like you said, on paper, before everything starts, it's just a no-brainer to start Ryan Tannehill. He's going against the Texans. He doesn't have to share the ball with Derrick Henry. He gets to throw it all day long. And me and a buddy of mine both have Ryan Tannehill on our teams. And we talked, yep, we're both starting him. Good to go. No questions there. And then, a couple quarters into it, I get a text that says Tannehill's terrible. And and that was the truth. And then I go and look over at Cam Newton, and he's just balled out. He had 3 touchdowns, 26 points in fantasy, and basically the complete opposite for Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill had 4 interceptions, a touchdown, and 9 points in fantasy. Yeah. So he just completely shit the bed.
Cam had the game that we expected Tannehill would have, but that's on the fantasy side where we don't really care who wins and loses.
Right.
In real NFL gameplay, the Washington football team spoiled Cam Newton's homecoming. So as good as he wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And that's, we were talking about it going into that game. Washington football team without Chase Young, what are they going to be? Are they going to be able to hold up on the defensive side of the ball? They had some bend, but they didn't break. And that's ultimately what you want out of your defense, especially one that's not 100%. And the offense was able to get it going. Terry McLaurin had a fantastic game as wide receiver, picking apart the Carolina secondary. Heineke's proven that he belongs as a quarterback 1 in the NFL. I don't think Ryan Fitzpatrick has a job there much longer.
No, I definitely don't. And I think Heineke showed that he had a big game that first game that he replaced Fitzpatrick. And I was like, okay, this is interesting, because if you can do that with a Washington football team offense. That's pretty impressive. Those guys, like we mentioned, Tyrod Taylor, that can find success with a less than ideal offense. That's saying something. And I do think he definitely has himself a job there if they want to keep him.
And I think they do.
Yeah, I don't think they have any other options. I mean, unless they want to trade up or something for a draft pick or whatever. But I think if you've got a guy that's already proven himself, that is already on your team, knows your playbook and everything, just roll with him instead of trying to roll the dice like every team tries to do every year. And I definitely think he has earned himself a QB1 spot.
Yeah, I agree. So look for Ryan Fitzpatrick next year if he decides to come back and play another season to be a quarterback on yet another NFL team.
Has he hit all 32 yet?
No, he's not even at the halfway point. I think he's hit like 14. But we talked about the number 1 seed in the AFC losing. So now let's talk about the number 1 seed in the NFC that also lost this weekend. And that is the Green Bay Packers. And the Minnesota Vikings finally find themselves on the right side of a last second field goal. This game was a back and forth affair, and it ended up being down to that field goal that the Minnesota Vikings were able to capitalize on. They walked off the field happy this time. How big is it for a team like the Minnesota Vikings to be able to knock off a huge rival like the Green Bay Packers and to somewhat, maybe play spoiler, because we'll look back at this if the Green Bay Packers aren't able to clinch the 1 seed in the NFC, and we'll look back at this game and be like, that's the game they should have won.
Huge. This is completely huge for the Vikings. This was supposed to be Aaron Rodgers's, fueled by hatred or whatever, fueled by, the naysayers and everything and all of his drama that came with his vaccination status. This was supposed to be his game to just throw it in everybody's faces. And it really did not work out. I think this was a big shock simply because Aaron Rodgers wasn't able to just go out and do whatever he absolutely wanted. He did have a good game personally, but again, it was not enough to win. And that's really what ultimately matters in the game of actual football instead of just fantasy. I also think that their kicker, Mason Crosby, has some issues. If you remember, he's for weeks now missed a lot of kicks that he should have made. That hurts you ultimately in the end. And yeah, this was a game that they probably should have won, and Vikings came out and proved everyone wrong. Justin Jefferson had a great game. Yeah. The guy that everyone loves to not hate per se, but not give credit to, Kirk Cousins, had yet another great game. He threw a beautiful dime for a touchdown that was just something that you would see from, one of the Hall of Famer bound quarterbacks. And yet here this guy is throwing dimes like that. It was wild to see. And they just were able to do it. And I think you're right. This is one of those games where they're playing spoiler, if anything. And, all those Vikings crazy fans are super pumped about that one.
Kirk Cousins is having a sneaky good season. He's a 21-2 touchdown to interception ratio right now. So he's balling out there. He's got almost 3,000 yards passing, and just beat the Green Bay Packers. But yeah, I think you said that Aaron Rodgers was supposed to go out there and do, scorched earth Aaron and just light the world on fire. He had a great game himself. He had 33 points in fantasy football and threw for a couple touchdowns, protected the ball. At one point in the game, he did have to go to the locker room and treat an injured toe. Apparently, he hurt his toe while he was in his COVID quarantine, and that seems to be giving him some fits and some issues. Jordan Love came out and actually took a few meaningless snaps before halftime because Aaron Rodgers had to go and treat that toe. So maybe that's limited him just a little bit, but he still went out and had a great game. And I think it was really the Green Bay defense that let them down.
Yeah, definitely.
But another thing that we've got to consider, and, we started the show talking about running backs. Of course, Aaron Jones not being in the mix has to have some sort of impact, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think that's point proven as to what it takes to be, one of those top level teams. I think Green Bay is probably one of the more top level teams with Aaron Jones and with a healthy Devonte Adams and Aaron Rodgers and everything like that. When you take one of those pieces away, you kind of see what can happen. I think A.J. Dillon in his own right is a good running back, but it's just not the same when you don't have that guy who's been around for a couple of years and just knows what to do and has been doing it. I think that's really the big key factor for guys that come in and they replace somebody. They haven't been taking those reps with the first team. They haven't been playing live football, drive after drive. And that's really where Aaron Jones, I think, really made his money, is being that dependable back. He's not one of the Aaron Henrys of the world, but I think he's absolutely dependable. And it really takes some pressure off of a quarterback, because we all know that all eyes are on Aaron Rodgers and Devonte Adams. But if all eyes are on those two, then that leaves your running back almost wide open for a check down, you name it, and he can be pretty much open for you. And I think that's pretty detrimental if you don't have him in there.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, except for the fact that you called him Aaron Henry and not Derrick Henry.
Oh, my bad.
But I don't know if you saw it, but I had a big smile on my face when you said it. I do think that Aaron Jones's injury is the reason that the Packers don't win the NFC this year.
I can see that. Yeah.
Meanwhile, another team there in the NFC, who is now the number one seed if the playoffs happen today, they are banged up, they are battered, they are bruised, and they are relentless, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. They went out there once again without D-Hop, without Kyler Murray, Colt McCoy leading the show, and they absolutely kicked the crap out of the Seattle Seahawks this week. This is a team that they've also lost J.J. Watt on defense. They've got backups all over the field. Chase Edmonds is out. Next man up mentality. This team keeps winning. This is the team to beat in the NFC, in my opinion. Especially they've got a bye week coming up. They're going to be able to get healthy, get right, come back rested and ready to go for this second or last quarter of the season. The Arizona Cardinals look scary.
I think this was the shock of the week, to be completely honest. I think Kyler Murray was questionable up until basically the start of the game there. And then once he was deemed out, it was like, okay, well, I mean, the Seahawks basically have this all wrapped up. That's not the case. And I think you're 100% right. This is the scariest team right now, because without all those pieces, they're still winning games. That's saying something. And that makes those starters that much more dangerous going down the road.
Yeah, they have been phenomenal. JC's hitting it in the comments that James Conner has been a touchdown machine, and he has since he's kind of filled in for that RB1. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know he's scored at least one touchdown in every game that he's played since becoming that starter for Arizona, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon, because he's finally looking like the guy that Pittsburgh thought that he was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a huge pickup for the Cardinals, and it's crazy how that next man up mentality is working for them. I definitely didn't expect that out of this team. I thought makes sense that Kyler Murray is doing well with that team. D-Hop, that's a given. But then once those guys are gone, you expect them to start to lose, and it's just not happening. And it's wild to see, honestly. And I think that defense not being as dangerous would have hurt them, but they're still pretty solid too.
Yeah. For the season, James Conner has 12 touchdowns. He has 7 in the last 5 games.
Nice.
He's balling out there, and that's because he is now the RB1 and doing the thing out there. Yep. Yeah, that's a scary team. Watch for them to make a big time surge after this bye week, especially whenever they get D-Hop and Kyler and all their guys back healthy. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. As of right now, they're the number 1 seed sitting at 9-2. The LA Rams at 7-3. I don't think that they're as good as we once thought that they were. I think they're going to start to slip.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a crazy deal there, because you think that they've got every piece they could ever want. And I guess we'll just see. I mean, it's hard to say at the moment, because we all kind of thought that the Chiefs were falling off, but they've kind of figured it out. That's a question mark, though. I think the Rams aren't necessarily a definitive answer yet, especially because of how good the Cardinals are.
The Rams have a pretty tough back end of their schedule as well. They've their next game, they travel to Green Bay to play the Packers. Then they have a get-right game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. It seems like everybody's got that get-right game against the Jags. And and then they go to Arizona to play those Cardinals. Then they play the Seahawks. Then in Minnesota against the Vikings. Then in Baltimore against the Ravens. And then they finish the season against the 49ers, who just crushed them 31-10 last week.
Crazy.
So they have a pretty rough back end of their schedule. I don't think that they come out of that NFC West. I think it's Arizona's division to lose, and Arizona should cruise.
Yeah, I could definitely see that happening, and that's pretty sad for a team who has just bought every tool they could possibly buy. They went all in this year. They don't have long to make that happen, and I think if the Cardinals are going to be this dominant, it's going to be that much harder for them to come up with a Super Bowl appearance. And I think that window is definitely closing, and Kyler Murray's going to take that from him. It's very possible.
Yeah, wow. Looking at the Cardinal schedule, they've got the Bears, the Rams, the Lions, the Colts, the Cowboys, and the Seahawks. So it's a little more favorable on their side. They've got a couple of pushover teams like the Lions and the Bears. So be interesting how it all comes down the stretch, and we'll definitely keep everybody posted on that. But the Sunday night football game this week, it was an instant classic. And, a lot of people were probably sitting there scratching their heads like, oh, when I turned off the TV, it was, the Chargers were up 17 points in the fourth quarter. And I was like, it's over. I'm going to bed. Well, if you were one of the few that did stay up and watch that game, the Steelers showed how relentless they can be. Even once Najee Harris got knocked off the field because he took a vicious shot to the head, which should have been called for a penalty, but it wasn't. He left the field for a couple plays, went to the concussion protocol tent, got taken back to the locker room, had to knock over a doctor on his way back onto the field, finally got back on the field, scored a big touchdown late. The Steelers were 17 points down going into the fourth quarter, came back and tied the game with like 4 minutes left to go. I looked at my wife and I told her this game may very well go to overtime with the way that this defense has been playing. She rolled her eyes and then rolled over like she was going to go to sleep. And then next thing I knew, the Chargers scored a late touchdown. Mike Williams hit on a deep route. It was over after that. But man, that was an exciting game.
Yeah. And JC is apparently a Steelers fan. What is the key to their success? I mean, obviously they came up short, but you got to think that that's, a sign of good things to come. If this team that, we at the beginning of the season, we thought that Big Ben should have joined Drew Brees and retired. And
I still do.
Yeah. And we thought that Najee Harris was going to be a bit bigger than he is. Those two TikToking wide receivers of theirs have been okay, but they still aren't, down in the dumps type of team. So I'm interested to see actually how they finish up.
I tell you, the biggest thing that I've seen from that team as far as talent is concerned is Deontay Johnson. This is a guy that I didn't really give too much credit to going into the season. I was like, oh, well, he'll just be the wide receiver 2 there to chase Claypool or whatever and to Juju. But he's not going to really make it an impact. He's the guy that's really stepped up. He's filled in those wide receiver 1 shoes. Claypool, I've never been that impressed with. He has a few big games here and there, but it is what it is. Him being able to go out and catch these passes makes the defense respect the pass game. He's made Big Ben look good again. And that opens up Najee Harris to be able to go out and rush like he does. And Najee Harris has been great.
Yeah.
He's been as advertised. I think the problem is everybody kind of expected him to just all of a sudden be that Hall of Fame running back that they thought that, like, oh, Jerome Bettis and guys like that. And he's still a rookie. He's still going to make mistakes. He's still going to have issues that need to be developed, but he's been great. He's been as advertised. And I think that he's at least in the conversation of Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And it's funny because I can't remember what radio show I was listening to, but they were just kind of, talking about the Sunday games on Friday. and they were saying that they flew Big Ben out to the game instead of just giving the ball off to Mason Rudolph and letting him have a chance at the game. They flew a guy out who's basically on his last year, as old as dirt, and they still want to give him the ball instead of Mason Rudolph.
I mean, wouldn't you, after seeing what Mason Rudolph did the week before? Like, he's been absolutely terrible every time that he's touched the ball out there. I would much rather have Big Ben, who, hasn't practiced, who is coming off of this COVID quarantine. You don't really know what you're going to get out of him, but it's got to be better than what you've got in Mason Rudolph.
Yeah. And I think besides the whole helmet bashing fiasco with Myles Garrett, he would have been a no-name player, and he's just probably not going to have a job after a while because he can't even be a backup and come in for a hurt Big Ben. There's really not a spot on a team for him. I mean, if you're going to be one of those career, second string quarterback type guys, you at least need to be consistent enough to come in when you're needed and play decently. You can't play poorly. I mean, that's the whole point that's the whole point of having you on the team. So I think he's a guy whose time in the NFL is pretty low.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers probably draft a quarterback in this upcoming NFL draft. I know I would if I were them.
Oh yeah.
Somebody like maybe Matt Corral from Ole Miss or Kenny Pickett from right there in Pittsburgh. I think those are guys that are definitely going to be drawing the most interest as far as quarterbacks are concerned. And the Steelers need a new guy because Ben can't keep going out there year after year.
No, he's already pushed his luck, and they don't have really an answer for him. I mean, obviously they don't have a backup waiting to take over. So I think drafting is the key.
Yeah, I think that. Or maybe one of these quarterbacks like an Aaron Rodgers who's sick and tired of his team. Maybe he comes and bridges the gap between Ben Roethlisberger and the next quarterback that comes up in the Pittsburgh system.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
We did hear Tomlin praising Aaron Rodgers earlier this season, so maybe there's something there.
Yeah, for sure.
I wonder what JC would think about Aaron Rodgers coming in being his quarterback for a year or two. I'm sure he would love it.
Right.
But in that game, we started off the night talking about Jonathan Taylor and his fantastic performance against the Bills. Austin Eckler was just as dominant.
Crazy.
He was out there. He was catching passes. He was rushing the ball. He was getting into the end zone nearly every single time that he touched the ball. And AE30 has become one of the best running backs in the NFL. And he's a guy that I love to watch. I've got him on both of my fantasy teams, and I love whenever he's racking up these points. Gotta love it with a guy. After the game, the sports analysts and all that were sticking the microphones in his face, and he was like, "Yeah, with that performance, I won myself a fantasy football matchup." You got to love it when guys play fantasy football and draft themselves, and they know what's on the line when they're out there on the field, because they're going through the same stuff we're going through. Like, oh man, if I just got on the end zone. And like I said earlier, that game ended with Herbert taking a knee at 1st and goal. They could have punched in a 5th touchdown right there. And I thought that they were going to, honestly, because they took a knee on 1st and goal. And then the Steelers called a timeout. They called their last timeout after they took the knee. And I was like, that's kind of a Bush League move. Like, the game is over. You just turned the ball over on downs. They're at 1st and goal.
Yeah.
He takes a knee to end it, and you're going to call a timeout. If I was the Chargers, I would have been like, all right, Eckler, go get number 5.
Punch one in. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shove it down their freaking throats. That's what I would have said. But
yeah,
I guess that's why I just play Madden and I'm not a real NFL head coach. And JC did mention something very important. Minkah Fitzpatrick being out was huge. They even alluded to it on that huge Mike Williams play that would have been Minkah Fitzpatrick's position right there that got burned.
Right.
And that loss was certainly noticeable. But let's go ahead and move into our fantasy studs and duds. and we've got a lot of the same people in mind, but we've reviewed our notes and we've kind of mixed it up a little bit. For quarterback, for me, segueing in off of that game that we just talked about, is Justin Herbert. This guy's been absolutely fantastic in the 2 years that we've seen him. This week, he posted 34.28 points. He had 382 yards passing, and he also added 90 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. This dude's doing it all. He's out there spreading the ball around, looking poised, looking like a veteran quarterback. Justin Herbert's great.
Crazy. Yeah. I mean, that's a huge game for him, for your running back and your quarterback to have both excellent fantasy football games is huge. And you couldn't ask for anything more. For my stud, I sadly have to say that Cam Newton really did come out of basically nowhere and put up a great game. Like we mentioned earlier, he had 3 total touchdowns. I think maybe 1 or 2 of those was a rushing touchdown. I did not catch that game. 198 yards passing, which is low, obviously, but we know that from Cam. He's not going to be, lighting it up for 400 yards. Sure. He did get 26 points in fantasy, and something that's just kind of really mind-boggling is in our league, only 3 quarterbacks had more than him. Those 3 quarterbacks are Aaron Rodgers with 33 points, Justin Herbert with 34 points, and Jalen Hurts with 30 points. Those are guys that have had a job all year. Cam Newton has been unemployed for 11 weeks and just got picked up by his old team, had a great first outing, a great second outing. I, for one, definitely did not see this coming. I don't want to say that Cam is back per se, but I think he's found where he fits in. And clearly he didn't really necessarily fit the scheme that the Patriots wanted to run. But if he can sustain this type of success, he can at least ride off into the sunset a little bit and finish the back end of his career as not somebody's backup. He's out there actually playing and doing well. So I think this is best case scenario for Cam.
He's always said that he's one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the world, and he's proven right now, at least for the past 2 games, that he's right.
Yeah.
My dud quarterback for the week has to be Dak Prescott. Dak posted 2.64 points in fantasy football. This is a guy that was one of the first quarterbacks off the board in a lot of leagues. He threw for 216 yards, 2 picks, 0 touchdowns. This was a game that was his MVP prove it game, in my opinion. He should have went out there and absolutely balled out against this defense, against the Kansas City defense that Brett's talking about right now. But they shut him down. Like Jared said earlier today, that defense has gotten a lot better in the last 4 weeks. They haven't allowed big points since, early on in the season. They've turned that corner. They absolutely showed it against Dak Prescott, and they shut him down. He was ineffective, and this was the game that he really needed to go out there and say, hey, I'm the MVP this year. This proves it. Still up for grabs.
Yeah, 100%. And, just a caveat right off of that, my bust at quarterback is going to be Patrick Mahomes. Whenever Kansas City doesn't have to rely on Patrick Mahomes to just completely ball out and then they win, something's changed. Patrick Mahomes this week had 1 interception, no touchdowns, and threw for 260 yards to come up with 7.5 points in fantasy. This is a guy who was taken probably first overall in the quarterbacks for a lot of people's leagues, probably 3rd, 4th round. Mm-hmm. Did not cut it this week. And I don't think that the Cowboys have a stellar defense, so I don't think that's to blame. I think they were just lucky that their defense was able to stave off the likes of the Cowboys. Very bad week for him, and yet they still pulled out the W, so that's lucky for sure. But, man, that was a not great game for Mr. Football. Mahomes.
But for, like you said, a guy that was drafted so early and for the past 2 or 3 years has been Mr. Consistent, dropping 30 points in fantasy. The offense has definitely changed. Fortunately for Kansas City fans, their defense has come around and is keeping them in games and helping them win these closer games. Yep. Not saying that 9-19 necessarily was a close game, but You
It's
get
a
what
lot
I'm
closer
saying.
than 30
That's
to
true.
9. You know?
Very true. My running back stud of the week has to be Austin Eckler. You know, I know who you're going with, and I know most people are thinking about, well, what about the other guy? We'll get to him in just a second. We've already talked about him a little bit, but Austin Eckler with 41.5 points for me and for himself in fantasy football. He had 50 yards rushing. He had 7 catches for 65 yards and 4 total touchdowns. He went out there and pretty much anytime he touched the ball, he was finding the end zone, playing that air electric guitar like he likes to do, and just absolutely balling. I love me some AE 30.
Yeah. He had a great game. And of course, you know, the running back that everyone's going to be talking about is my boom. Who else other than Jonathan Taylor? Man, he had had himself a game. 53 points is just something spectacular from one single person on your fantasy team. 5 total touchdowns really was the bulk of that, obviously. For him to do this against the Bills defense was a complete shock to me. I did not fathom that to be the case. I think something may be up in Buffalo. I don't really know. It's hard to say. If this continues, there might be trouble. But this was just a crazy performance from that Colts offense, and obviously, Jonathan Taylor was the bulk of that. And guy had himself a day. I'm sure all the owners of him are very happy. Yeah, just a huge performance.
You know, I should have looked it up before we came on live, but I wanted to see who scored the most fantasy points in a game. It looks like it was Jerry Rice back in the day with 68.5.
Boy,
That's pretty insane. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor was up there with 50 plus. Anytime you get that output from one player, there's a good chance you're going to walk away with a dub in your fantasy football matchup. However, toot our own horn a little bit. One of our listeners chimed in this morning on Twitter. Let me pull it up so I can give credit to his name. Gregory Webster at GWeb Purple. He said Myles Gaskin was much better than Williams for Kansas City for my running back too. I won with my opponent having Taylor scoring 53 somehow. Had to go with Flacco after Lamar Jackson went out with his illness, but thanks for the help for telling him to start Myles Gaskin. Gaskin went out there and got 18.6 points, and that put Gregory up by 1 point in fantasy football. 1 point. If he would have started Williams, he would have lost this week. So
yeah.
You're welcome, Gregory. I hope you keep listening. I hope you keep tuning in because we're here to help.
Yeah. And then that's honestly great to hear. If you want to be like Gregory and win by 1 point, sometimes we do know what we're talking about. Other times we get point proven by Cam Newton and Ryan Tannehill, but we definitely do have some pretty solid calls. And every Saturday for at least the NFL season, we chatted up with fantasy football picks and coverage and stuff like that. So if you need help, if you have questions, hit us up in our socials, in our comments, or you can tune into that show and drop them in the comments. We're basically answering questions all through that show, mixed in with our analysis and picks and stuff like that. So I think it's a great place to just drop in, ask your question, we'll answer it, and if you can't stay for the whole thing, at least you got your question answered.
Yep. Brett's asking or he's saying, come on, Taylor's the best running back in football. I think this is a question worth a number 1 pick next year.
I'd say no. He's probably going to be moved up quite a few levels.
I think he's definitely top 3.
Yeah. I don't want to go number 1 just yet, but yeah, he's definitely moved up quite a bit.
Yeah, for sure. What's up, Godfather? What's wrong with AJ Brown? He's killing me this year. What's wrong with him is Ryan Tannehill.
Yes.
Moving on. My running back bust of the week is Alex Collins for the Seattle Seahawks. This is a dude that was expected to come in and take the bulk of the touches after Carson went down with injury and all that stuff. He's only posted 3.6 points. He had 10 attempts for only 36 yards. They just cannot get the rushing game going with Alex Collins. So he's my dud for the week.
Yep. I definitely agree with that. And Another story of not being able to get the rushing game. My bus is going to be Ezekiel Elliott. They just either can't utilize him, don't utilize him, whatever the case is. He only put up 32 yards and got 12 points. Bad day for him, and that's kind of been his MO at this point. He has games where he does excel, but for the most part, he's pretty down. And for a guy who was probably at least top 5 for running backs taken overall, this is just not cutting it. I mean, when there's guys like Jonathan Taylor that probably went in a whole round after him to be putting up much bigger points, not good. And this guy, like we've been saying all along, this guy's getting paid. And he's just abysmal. Again, I don't know if that's Mike McCarthy's fault or what, but for fantasy owners, it doesn't really matter. He's not putting points on your board.
Yeah, like you said, Zeke was drafted in the first round in pretty much every league out there, and Jonathan Taylor in our league, at least with a lot of savvy fantasy football players, was picked up in the second round.
Mm-hmm.
So to keep with the Forrest Gump theme of the night, fantasy football is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
It's 100% true.
My stud wide receiver for the week is Devonte Adams, 30.5 points, 7 receptions, 115 yards, 2 touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers finally utilized him. He was finally able to get free enough to go off. This was a game that he had. This is an average game for him last year. Last year, Devonte Adams was lighting the world on fire. This year, he's been held back. He hasn't really had the breakout game that we expected from him, and a lot of people drafted him to have. He balled out this week.
Yeah, 100%. It's not every day that you get to talk about a Jets player being one of your booms, but this is one of those days. And Elijah Moore came out of nowhere and dropped 29 points on the Dolphins defense. He had himself a touchdown, 141 yards, and 8 receptions. I think this is a guy who made his way somehow on our Saturday show, and you and I were both like, well, he's a Jets player, so you got to kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Apparently, that didn't matter for him this week. That was a huge, huge performance from him. If you were lucky enough to have him on your team and you just so happened to put him in your starting lineup, I'm sure you're ecstatic for that, because there's no way anyone thought that he was going to put him almost 30 points.
Yeah, I certainly didn't. I know you didn't either. And I didn't think that Joe Flacco coming in was going to make such a big difference to that offense, but they went out there and they played well. So good for them, I guess.
Yeah.
But they still lost to the Dolphins. My dud wide receiver is T. Higgins, and this is a guy that I've been very high on for the majority of the season, but he posted 3.5 points. He only had 2 catches for 15 yards. Tyler Boyd and Jamar Chase got the bulk of the targets for that Cincinnati offense. And I guess that's the catch-22. When you have such a good trio of wide receivers, somebody's going to get left out. We've said it about the Bucs. We can kind of see the same thing happening in LA with the Rams. If you have so many mouths to feed, somebody's not going to get fed that game. This week, it was T. Higgins. And for fantasy owners, that's an agonizing position to be in, because you don't know, is your guy going to be the guy that goes off that week or not?
Yep. Yeah. Same issue that I always run into with Tyler Boyd. Like, he'll go off and then I'll put him in, and then he'll be the guy that doesn't get fed. And it's just one of those things that you can never really figure it out. And it makes you just absolutely sick to your stomach, because that's what fantasy football does. Kind of the same thing here for me, but I'm going to go with a tight end instead of a wide receiver, and I'm going to go with Dan Arnold, tight end for the Jaguars.
My boy.
A guy who we've been talking about. I picked him up off of your suggestion. I think this one is not necessarily his fault, because he wasn't even targeted a single time. So for whatever reason, he was just completely kept out of the game plan. I don't know if that's, Trevor Lawrence's fault, if that's Urban Meyer's fault. I don't know what the case is there, but nonetheless, Trevor Lawrence's basically favorite target was not targeted a single time this week. And that's rough. To put up a big old goose egg is not great. I think This may be an anomaly. I think he'll probably come back in the weeks to come with much more production, because this was an off week, and I hope we never have to see that again.
You know what that tells me? It tells me that the 49ers head coach Kyle Shanahan is a confirmed listener of this podcast, because he was like, oh, they're talking about Arnold. Well, let's make sure that he doesn't beat us. Let's cover him. He's not going to be the guy that gets the ball. And that's what they did.
That's a great point.
That's the only logical thing that makes sense, right?
I
Kyle, that. What's up, buddy?
Yeah, you're welcome for that.
Yeah, give us credit. Give us a job. How about that? Let's see. And like the Godfather says, I do want to give a shine once again to that New England defense for 26 points. They ended up with 4 interceptions and 4 sacks on Thursday night, and they absolutely balled out. Man. I'm so fortunate that I had them as my starting defense and got off to a huge start Thursday night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking ahead real quick at the playoffs, if they were to start today, the Patriots would be a 3 seed winning the AFC East. Did you think at the beginning of the season that would have been even remotely possible?
I thought second place was about their ceiling. I thought this was the Bills' division to lose, and that they should go on and basically march to the AFC Championship. And I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's over for the Bills, but there's definitely trouble. And do not sleep on the Patriots. Their offense. Go ahead.
Next week, they play the Tennessee Titans, who are the 1 seed.
Yep.
And the Ravens play division rival in the Browns. So if the Ravens lose and the Patriots can beat the Titans, they are the number 1 seed, and all roads to the AFC playoffs go through Foxborough.
Yeah, that's insane. They have a different offense. They don't have TB12 anymore, but they do have a absolutely solid rookie quarterback. I mean, we're talking about a rookie here. That's something that I think people are almost starting to forget, because he's consistent, and you hardly ever see that from young guys. And again, to hammer it home, this defense was just wild, shutting out team after team. It's crazy to see. Something that we didn't really think of until it started happening. They did get everyone back from last year, and they've added some pieces. They did lose Stephon Gilmore, but that does not seem to affect anything.
J.C. Jackson's filled in beautifully.
Yeah, if they can just continue to lean on that defense, and the offense does enough to win games, the sky's the limit, because I think they've already exceeded most people's expectations.
Yep. I agree. And Mac Jones being a solid game manager, I think that's the best way to put him. He's not going out there and he's not throwing for 400 yards a game, carrying the team,
right?
But he's managing the game. He's mitigating the turnovers. Over the last 5 games, he only has thrown 2 interceptions. So he's keeping the ball with the offense, running the plays that are given to him, making smart passes. I think he's on pace still to break Dak Prescott's record for completion percentage by a rookie. Wow. So he's out there, he's doing his part, and that defense is stealing the show. Typical Bill Belichick team, though. Defense with just a solid game manager as a quarterback.
Yeah.
You looking forward to these games that happen on Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I think they'll be fun. I always enjoy a good Thanksgiving football game, no matter who's playing. I mean, obviously, we're going to get the obligatory Cowboys game. But yeah, I'm looking forward to watching some football on Turkey Day.
Yeah, it's always fun. It's always a good time. I think there's one game on Thanksgiving that I'm looking forward to more than any, and it's the very last one of the evening. I believe that's the Saints. And who is it that the Saints play? The Bills. Saints and Bills.
Ooh, yeah, that'll be a nice one.
So that'll be a good game, and go Saints.
There you go.
What are you looking for tonight on Monday Night Football before we get out of here?
I'm hoping that the Giants kicker stubs his toe and can't play for the entire game, because that will secure my win for the week in fantasy. And I think Tom has a chance to do another spectacular performance under the bright lights, in prime time. This is where he makes his money. This is where he shines. He knows this position better than anyone. This is his chance to yet again prove that he's the GOAT. I hope he does, just for the sake of football. I really don't have any skin in the game either way. So I hope to just see a good performance and see some exciting football.
Tom Brady historically doesn't have the best track record against the Giants in big games, but that's for another show.
Right.
All I need is for Tom Brady and for Chris Godwin to combine for 5 points in fantasy, and I've got the week locked up. So as long as they don't just throw for negative yardage and fumble the ball every time they touch it, I should be okay.
There you go.
But that's what I'm looking forward to. And we'll be back Saturday night to preview and give you our picks for week 12. Can you believe we're already at week 12 of the NFL season? We'll have to put out some sort of tweet or update for Thursday night start, or Thursday starts too, because we've got 3 games going on Thursday this week. We need to make sure that we address for all of our listeners and stuff out there. So maybe we'll have to do an impromptu Wednesday night.
Yeah, quite a busy week because of all the Thursday night games.
Yeah,
so.
maybe we'll have to do Wednesday and Saturday this week. Yeah, we'll talk about that offline. Enjoy the games tonight, guys. Hope everybody wins their week in fantasy football, and we will see you guys next time. We out.